welcome to another episode of Strictly History. I'm Katie.
I'm Allison.
I'm a guest.
And we have Joe here as a guest. And today we are going to be discussing the history of anime, not only in Japan, but also in the United States and other Western countries. Anime, I think, has now permeated most of Western society. Now we have brand new anime that's been coming out within the last few years, like Attack on Titan, Demon Slayer, and I mean, it's been 20 years since Naruto became an anime from his manga. Sailor Moon has gotten other iterations done of the original anime that came out in the 90s.
Goku is a close personal friend to us all.
Yes. Goku is. So, I guess I'll start. We have evidence, or at least historians in Japan have evidence of like the first anime actually being animated in 1907. Of course, because of subsequent earthquakes and tsunamis that Japan has sustained in the 1920s and the 1930s, most of the earlier animations in Japan of the time have been destroyed, which is really a shame. But early animation was made with chalk drawings. Unlike here in the United States, early animation was made with celluloid.
Yep.
Thank you for confirming that. Where each animated piece was inked and painted onto cells to make a moving picture. And you see that with like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Mm-hmm. But in Japan, they were all chalk drawings, so that the chalk could then be erased and redrawn to complete a scene. One of the first intact animes that Japanese animators have is from 1917, and it's called Shinjaku Meian no Shipao. I think I'm saying that correctly, but I could be wrong, and I apologize for that. Again, it's a chalk drawing, and there's no sound to it because, of course, 1917, there's still silent pictures going on. And then, of course, we get to World War II. Now, like in the United States, where we have Walt Disney making propaganda shorts, in Japan, you see the same exact thing, where anime is really relegated to propaganda films to keep, morale up of the Japanese people, to keep soldiers and sailors fighting in World War II. And, of course, we come to Japan's surrender, and now, because propaganda films are no longer being created, animators had to really think about how they wanted to create anime for a peacetime world.
And around this time, with America sort of heading the rebuilding process of Japan, we are exporting, I guess, a whole lot of American films, especially Disney stuff. That is our brand of cultural imperialism, and we sent them everywhere. Yeah. Not even just Japan. France, too, got so much of that.
Yeah. So, one of the founders for Taiyo Daio, which became like the top animation studio in Japan around this time, had seen Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and decided to make an anime that was recognizable as a fairy tale within the culture of Japan. And I believe it was called, because I have it here, and everything's kind of sort of out of order. It was called The Legend of the White Snake, or Hakugen in Japanese. So we're starting to see a different turn of anime in Japan itself. It's now geared towards more children, families, and a fun fact, during Taiyo Daio's run, Hayao Miyazaki, the creator of Ghibli, was part of the animators going to this studio in Japan to create anime for society as a whole, as it were. I guess. I don't know how I'm saying. If what I'm saying is making any sense. So at this point, any Japanese animation has not made it to the Western world yet until the late 60s, 1968, we get Astro Boy.
Made by Osamu Tezuka, who is pretty widely regarded as like a very pivotal figure in the history of Japanese animation, often equivocated to Walt Disney, heavily inspired by Disney too. According to this little fun fact on his Wikipedia page, he saw Bambi 80 times when he was a kid.
God. Wow.
So yeah, dude was obsessed.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he was a really prevalent mangaka as well in Japan. I think he's like one of the articles that I had read earlier, like quoted him as being called like the manga god in Japan. So he's the manga creator of Astro Boy, and it came to the United States, and it saw moderate success in the United States. Unfortunately, however, because of economics being economics, the market in Japan, the bubble kind of like burst. And this also happened in the 90s, but it happened earlier on as well. And so a lot of animators who weren't being paid as well as they should have been in Japan were increasingly wanting more pay, higher pay, and the production of animation kind of dropped. And so there hadn't been, I don't want to say that it lagged, but it kind of stopped anything from Japan being sent to the United States. But then you get Speed Racer.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Have any of us actually seen episodes of the original Astro Boy? I haven't.
No,
But
I haven't.
I find early anime dubs to be very charming because it usually sounds like it was recorded by the same 5 people in Brooklyn. And I don't know, there's something really fun about that.
Yeah.
I think that's largely what Speed Racer was.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the same guy recording in 2 days, so that.
There are some amazing Speed Racer clips online. There's one called "Going Over That Cliff."
Oh,
just
that
look at it. Classic.
I mean, I can remember sitting in my grandparents' living room watching Cartoon Network and watching Speed Racer. Of course, being a young child in the 90s and watching reruns of Speed Racer, I had no idea that it was an anime until much later in my life.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen Speed Racer. When I was watching TV and anime was on, it was like Dragon Ball Z, Digimon,
Right.
those sort of things.
Same,
Pokemon,
yeah.
I mean, I really didn't get into anime until I was like in middle school, because elementary school was, of course, the original Pokemon series. Again, I didn't realize it was anime until I was like in middle school, high school kind of thing. I don't know if that's just because I wasn't up on anything.
I tried to watch Dragon Ball Z as a kid, and because I thought like the character designs were really cool. I played some of the video games and they were awesome. And then I tried to watch the show, and it was an episode that was just Piccolo and Cell staring at each other for 30 minutes thinking,
yeah.
and I was just like, I don't think this is for me.
Which is understandable. I mean, there can be 2 episodes of Goku just powering up and nothing really going on.
No, I know they pared it down now.
They
There's
did.
like a abridged version.
There
so.
is. There is.
See, I remember watching it a lot, but not having any like thoughts about it. I just remember watching it.
Well, I mean that so what's really interesting is that when I started watching anime, I got my mom into watching anime. So we would watch it together when she would come home from work, and we would watch like Dragon Ball Z, and Yu Yu Hakusho, and then we got really into Inuyasha. Or I really got into Inuyasha. Inuyasha, I think, is like my favorite anime. And the original Fruits Basket. But I really love the updated Fruits Basket. I think it's more coherent with the manga.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I've only seen all of the original. I haven't seen all of the...
You should see the newer stuff.
My sister watched it all. I should have just watched it with her.
So, alright, so we're at like the 70s now, right?
We
So
are.
I know Lupin the Third starts early 70s in Japan, and I know that's aimed more at adults, and it's also the start of Miyazaki's career, and and eventually that became a pretty decent hit over here. I know Adult Swim was big on airing it in the early days.
Yeah. Do we know when Adult Swim started being a thing?
Adult Swim started 2001, I think.
Oh, okay.
That makes
Yes.
sense.
I was 11 then. Oh, the time. I also really like Naruto. Naruto is also Naruto Shippuden.
Started around the same time.
It did start around the same time. Yep.
Okay, it started 2000.
Okay.
Adult Swim.
Yeah.
So clearly, as we've already shown, anime slowly but surely started gathering a following here in in America, in the United States, and in Western cultures. I think what really springboarded an interest in anime was Sailor Moon. I think Sailor Moon really broke the way for other anime to come into Western culture as a whole. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not.
But on that note, we should bring up that the American version of Sailor Moon that was airing was pretty goofy. It was entirely dubbed, and oftentimes with very little regard to what was actually happening in the original episode.
Yeah.
And they added in segments where Sailor Moon told you not to do drugs.
Oh god.
And
It needed to be educational.
yes.
This was the 90s.
It was a Saturday morning cartoon. They all had to follow this model.
Yeah.
And but so even though it was getting here, it was often getting here in sort of weird, compromised ways, where American networks were cutting it up and using it for their own purposes. In the late 80s, I think, Robotech started airing here, and that was a combination of 3 different anime series. One of them was Macross, that was the main one, but a bunch of other stuff was cut in too, and it was a big hit, and people were into it because it was oh cool, this is a sci-fi cartoon, but it had very little to do with what it was being adapted from.
It's so not cool. Anyway.
Robotech's honestly pretty fun though.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an amalgamation, but
Yeah. Of course, I didn't watch Sailor Moon. It was really not on my radar growing up.
I was watching it a lot. But when you're young, you don't realize that you're not getting
Right.
yeah,
the full package of what it's supposed to be. You just accept what you're shown.
Yeah.
yeah. I forget what her name in Japan is, but I know it's definitely not Serena.
No, it's
No.
Usagi.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what's really good though too is that with Sailor Moon Crystal, you're getting what the anime had initially intended to be.
I know nothing about Crystal.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
the
if
recent
Simone-
one, right?
Yeah, if Simona was here, she'd be able
That's why
to.
I told her.
she would have been able to tell us about it. But it's so I think the way I understand it, and for those of you watching in the comments, you can let me know if I'm wrong or not. Sailor Moon Crystal's supposed to be this reboot of the original Sailor Moon series that aired here in the United States, and because I saw a few episodes of Sailor Moon Crystal, and she's called Usagi. She's not called something else.
Yeah, and I think they've done another dub for the original series that is more faithful, and
Right.
the 2 girls who are dating are not cousins.
Yeah. Yeah. Fun stuff. So, I mean, since, again, we're talking about the anime coming into the United States and Europe and all these other places, I think I can, give it to you guys to talk about
Yeah.
westernization of anime and...
Okay, so yeah. I looked into a lot of fan sub stuff because I find that interesting because, like, these were pretty much black market items.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really interesting. 'Cause, like,
Yeah.
I've seen them. I saw them on YouTube.
Oh,
Back
yeah.
in, like, 2009, I don't think you could go anywhere without seeing them.
And, like, these, like, they were doing this on, like, early 80s computers, like Amigas and Commodores, and, like, I don't know. They were sourcing them from laser discs that were probably imported from Japan at a great cost.
I mean,
like,
that's really cool. Though.
Yeah. No, because, like, people wanted to see this stuff. Apparently, the first recorded anime club in the U.S. was the Cartoon Fantasy Organization. And they started in 1977, and they sort of just traded tapes. Like, that was their deal. And, like, they would trade tapes with, like, people in Japan. They'd send, like, Star Trek over and get an episode of Gundam in return.
Wow.
It's a good trade, I'd say.
And especially since, like, a lot of the stuff getting officially brought over in the 80s was cut up and redubbed and made different. Like, Roger Corman did a sort of notorious version of Nausicaa that made Ghibli put down a strict, like, no, if our films are released in any other country, they must be uncut rule.
Yeah, then it was a couple years, I think like 10 years, until there was another English dub of a Studio Ghibli movie. Like, that's how bad that was for being able to see those movies in English.
Why? Why would people do that? What?
Yeah, I
like,
think they cut.
what
26
in
minutes.
their
There
head
was-
thought it
I
was
mean,
a good idea?
There
to
was
do
just
that?
the perception in America of, like, oh, animation's for children. And so they usually just wanted to make it as fast as possible and cut out any gory stuff or anything too mature.
I think
Yeah.
I think adults give children a bad rap because they are smarter than I think a lot of adults give them
Oh,
credit
yeah,
for.
but, I mean, like, Roger Corman just played to the market. That's what he was about. I love that dude, but yeah, he did a lot of weird cuts.
Yeah, he
Jeez.
cut 26 minutes from the movie and changed. A lot of the themes then were lost
Oh no.
about the environment.
Which is really interesting because Corman was sort of a bleeding heart about environmentalism in all of his own movies. So it's like,
Yeah, that is weird.
yeah, it's like, what was happening there?
Did he like not understand that that Nausicaa Valley of the Wind was also about like a commentary on environmentalism?
I don't.
It might have just been an accidental losing the plot.
Yeah.
You know, when you cut 26 minutes from a movie.
Do better. Do better. That's all I have to say.
But yeah, and like, there's a lot of like funny stuff in these early fan subs. Like, there's a famous image from like a Dragon Ball episode where in the credits it's like, "No thanks to Miami Mike. I remember what you did to me at Dragon Con." And it's just, you get to see all like this very early fandom drama that's funny. But yeah. And like, because there really wasn't much actual distribution happening in the US, a lot of the Japanese companies were just like, all right, whatever, let's just turn a blind eye. And I mean, I guess they're just marketing our stuff for us.
That's cool.
Yeah, a lot of what I focused on was the Americanizing, westernization of anime, because I think that's a big part, you know, when you talk about how anime came to the United States and how it was received.
Yeah.
Like, we already touched on a little bit, but there was a perception, and even now, I think it lingers, that animation's for children.
Yeah.
American cartoons are usually for children,
Yeah.
and there are cartoons for adults here too, but usually they're comedic and not very serious. Sometimes there are,
raunchy.
but yeah, like they're usually
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're usually comedies.
Yeah.
yeah, like nothing like we're getting
Like
out of
The
anime.
Simpsons and Family Guy and all that stuff
Yeah, so
for adults.
even early on with Astro Boy and Speed Racer, you know, those series were altered to
Yeah.
fit both an American audience but also for children, which there were pretty strict ideas about what children should be watching in
Yeah.
the 60s and going on to the 90s, early 2000s. So, you know, most often you'd see they would change the names,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think happens now. I can't think of an
No.
example, But I think most early anime that was on TV here, the names are different. They're not Japanese anymore.
Yeah, I saw like a really early one from the 70s. It was a mech show, and it was called Getter Robo in Japan, and here it was Starvengers.
Yeah, changing the names to not a direct translation, but something different.
Right.
Yeah, editing out violence, changing the plot so it isn't as mature, cutting out entire episodes, which seems like it would make it difficult to follow along a series.
We kind of grew up in that era too, because like did you see any like 4Kids anime? Yeah, exactly. Like we were watching Yu-Gi-Oh, and they were just in the shadow realm, you know.
I mean, the manga Yugi is a much more darker character. As I never read the manga, but I knew people who I was friends with people who did, and they were saying how like the villains are far more dark and devious, and
they die.
If you lose the card game, you die.
Your soul is not sent to the shadow realm. So
and there was like a season 0 that was never dubbed because it was more violent than the rest of the series.
Of course.
So I think taking series that didn't fit the American idea of what children should be watching, and I don't know how they were necessarily marketed in Japan.
Yeah.
But then trying to adapt them for an American child audience resulted in a lot of changes that made it a lot different.
Right.
And over time, as American audiences realize that they're getting a watered down and changed version of what they want to be watching, then people are going to be very unhappy.
Yeah, they take matters into their own hands, as
The
Joe
fans.
eloquently showed.
Especially once the internet started, it just unavoidable at that point, because it's so much easier to do on modern computers, and
It's, and I mean, I think another aspect to anime, more so I think for Japan, for Japanese culture than as opposed to Western culture, because in Western culture we're all about like the individual, right? What the individual can do, to build yourself up in society and whatnot. In Japan, and this is not a criticism of Japanese culture or anything, but Japanese culture and Japanese society is all about the collective, what the collective can do to help an individual, and it's permeated in like their schooling, their workforce, all aspects of life in Japan, and you see it in the anime. I mean, I think classic examples are like One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, I mean, Inuyasha, Naruto. Yes, you have individual heroes, but the individual doesn't rely solely on their own strength or their own perseverance. It's like their group of friends who help them, persevere through whatever challenge they're going through within a story arc, and it's all of them working together to succeed in whatever they're trying to do in the anime. And of course in Western, I think more so in the United States than I think anywhere else, is that if you have a hero in a cartoon or an animated series, it's the individual person that's, yes, they may have help, but it's all about their own perseverance, their own strength in order to get the job done, as it were.
Not the power of friendship.
Right, not the power of friendship. Yes.
I think Cartoon Network and Adult Swim really played a major role
Toonami,
in
too.
mainstreaming this stuff. Toonami was blocks on both of them.
Yeah.
And
because I grew up watching Toonami.
Because especially Adult Swim, I think that was the first time a lot of anime was airing uncut in the U.S.
Yeah.
I know the first series they showed was Cowboy Bebop, but I know a lot of other stuff got big on there too, like Evangelion and Fooly Cooly, Death Note.
Yu Yu Hakusho. I mean, I I can remember being at my dad's house and just being up late because I couldn't sleep and having Adult Swim on, and I'm like 10, 11 years old and I'm watching Yu Yu Hakusho, and I think it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen, ever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then that's where you get into all the other anime after that.
Yeah, I think definitely Adult Swim was very beneficial. You know, once people accept that there is anime that's not for children and that it is just for more mature audiences, and you put it on a platform where there should be only adult audiences watching it, then you can be more faithful.
Yeah.
And you don't have to censor the violence and mature themes.
No,
You know who's watching
they
it.
knew most of the audience was 12-year-olds
Yeah.
staying up too late.
I mean,
That you can't stop.
right. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was in high school, I think, when Inuyasha was really big, and I would stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning just to watch an episode of Inuyasha. And then I got smart and I started buying the series. Started asking for seasons, for the individual seasons every Christmas until I got them all.
Yeah, I saw some interesting things online about how, because in the early to mid 2000s, there was like a growth in like the availability of DVDs of anime series, but because you would have to buy a number of seasons or the whole series, it wasn't as, you couldn't really be a casual viewer just checking something out. If you knew you liked it, you'd be willing to buy the whole series.
Absolutely.
But in the early 2000s, was either you try to catch it on TV, you find it somewhere online maybe,
if you were
or
lucky,
you buy it, and that's, you know, it's not as casual.
No.
Or easy.
No.
Yeah, so like that like subculture aspect to it still sort of hung on. Like it's like, oh, if you're into this stuff, you're into this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think about how difficult. And I assume when I was watching Dragon Ball Z, I never watched an episode in order because I just watched whatever was shown. So who knows, like, what I was getting out of the show?
Right. It could have been a rerun, and then you're watching it, and it's like, this looks familiar.
Yeah.
I already saw this. Why are you showing this to me again?
Yeah, and for anime where the story is very much ongoing throughout the season, you know, that's a big part of the viewing experience.
Yeah.
And that's why I was thinking about, you know, when they're cutting out all these episodes, it seems a lot of the plot is probably lost in that way, too.
Yeah.
Good luck if you were a kid trying to watch One Piece on the WB or whatever.
Oh,
like.
God. There was no way. There was no way. And I think, too, because I don't know about you guys, if you guys read any manga, but because I, like, got into anime, I also started reading a lot of manga as well, and I started collecting a lot of manga. I think my first manga was Rurouni Kenshin.
Oh, okay.
I got all 27 volumes of Rurouni Kenshin. I was very proud of myself. And even that's a wait, too. I have to wait an entire year for just one volume.
Wow.
Yeah.
Between when it was published in Japan and
published
here.
in Japan and then published here in the United States.
I would assume the wait is probably a lot less now. For
Yes.
something like that.
Now I only have to wait a few months. And it's torturous.
Better than a year, though.
It's true. True. So do we have anything more to say about anime and how it really, like, permeates our own lives, or are we
I also thought it'd be interesting to talk about more, like, recent.
Yeah.
Because, like, I was trying to figure out reasons why, in addition to things like Adult Swim, that the adaptations, or not adaptations, but the English dub versions would be more faithful to the original now.
Yeah.
And one thing that I found was that now, since most anime is simulcasted, that it's coming out in Japan within an hour, usually you can watch the episode here as well.
Yeah.
And then usually the most popular shows are being dubbed where it's like a week or two behind.
Right.
So there's also less time, one, to edit out anything that might not be what American audience would typically be shown. But then also it's easier to compare the two.
Yeah.
So it's kind of holding
Well,
English dubs accountable.
Yeah, I think also with the advent of streaming.
Yes.
Especially Funimation. If you had their streaming, you could, because this is what happened to me. I was watching the updated, rebooted Fruits Basket series, and I had to wait at least a week or two in order to get the dubbed version. And also with Yashahime, I was also watching it as it was being aired in Japan, and I had to wait like a week or two before I can actually see the dubbed anime, which frustrated me and also excited me at the same time. So it was.
Yeah.
I ended up stopping for like months and then seeing more episodes up, and I was very excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really availability. Like when you can just hit a button and switch to the Japanese dub, it's like it's just like, oh, okay. Like I guess these things should be more in line. And
Yeah, because when you don't know what you're missing, it's easy not to try to call attention to it or, call out a company when you don't know there's a problem.
Yeah.
But when you know.
Yeah. And I think
anime fans will make it known.
Yes.
Oh, they will.
Big problems, especially with like social media now. Like,
yeah.
People on Twitter.
They will make it known. I think though for the most part, I can trust companies like Funimation and Crunchyroll because they're dedicated to anime and manga and merch and all this other stuff. So I know that I'm getting, if I decide to watch a series in English rather than Japanese, I know I'm getting a faithfully dubbed.
I will say the dubs are definitely better in terms of like actually being faithful now, but I kind of miss the 90s voice acting. I don't know, I feel like they had a lot of energy back then, and now a lot of it tends to be like just, oh, we need to go find the amulet or whatever. Just kind of flat, like, and it's just like,
I guess it's like a level of taking it more seriously.
But it's just like, nah, give me someone with like a weird regional accent doing this. I don't know. I like in the 90s Evangelion dub when Asuka is like kind of from Texas, and it's like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't dislike the early Sailor Moon dub voices, even though they are a bit goofy at times. But I don't know. It just.
Who's the nerd kid? I think they call him Melvin in the dub.
I don't remember.
He had a really good voice, I remember.
I mean, it makes it stand out.
Yeah, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the crop of like Adult Swim anime got good stuff. Like the Cowboy Bebop dub is still like pretty stellar.
Yeah.
I think most people would agree.
Yeah, I absolutely love the dub for Inuyasha. I think their voice actors did really, really good. Really good. Good job. Good job, guys. Good job.
Yeah, so like things like that show like the better dubbing isn't something we've only seen like in the 2010s.
Yeah.
It was happening in the early 2000s too.
Yes, it was.
There has been a progression, but it was there.
Yeah, I feel like especially like with Naruto, since it aired in 2001, and then it ended in 2017. Yes, the character has aged and grown up, so you're gonna get a much different, it's the same voice actor, but their tone is very different from when he was a kid. But I don't know if that's a good example or not with in terms of voice acting. Voice acting is great.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like, when a show is on TV for that long, you really can like see the progression of like an industry too, and how it's developed professionally, and as there's more money in it.
Yeah, they probably switched to digital partway through too. Like.
Yeah, and I think Naruto is one of those examples of an anime doing extremely well in the United States.
Yeah. I think anime movies have been doing pretty great here too.
Yeah.
Like Your Name was a massive hit. Promare got good attention and stuff. So. Yeah. I think it's definitely something that's going more and more mainstream as years go on.
I
That's
would agree with
something
that.
I found very interesting too. Like, at least for like the Demon Slayer movie and the Jujutsu Kaisen movie, you could watch it in either dub or sub.
Yeah.
So like there is, more options available, which like I didn't expect. You would
Yeah.
think it's movie theaters in the United States that you would only be able to watch it in English, but that's not the case.
No, and I don't know if you guys knew this, but the most recent Dragon Ball Z movie that came out in August.
Orange Piccolo one?
I don't know. I didn't get to
Okay.
see it, and I wanted to see it.
I'm pretty sure Piccolo becomes orange in it, and like that's his new form.
That's
Oh.
interesting. But it had like the highest grossing anime movie to ever be like released in the United States, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they just keep making more
Yeah.
and more money, which is good, because then,
It shows
The-
interest.
yeah, and the more like the industry grows here, the more movies that will come over. Hopefully, eventually, they'll come over faster.
Yeah.
Because I know that's a complaint,
Mhm.
when a movie premieres in Japan, then you have to wait like 6 to 8 months to watch it.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
It is a long time. That is a long time. It's too long. It's too long, guys. It's too long. So do we have any final thoughts? What are you guys' favorite anime that you would always go back to watch if you just wanted to watch something nostalgic?
Something nostalgic or just something that I like?
Both.
I feel like my favorite shows are either Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood
Mm-hmm.
or Attack on Titan.
Okay. What about you, Joe?
I really like Fooly Cooly. Utain is pretty sick
Uh-huh.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Utain is fun because it was made by one of the guys who worked a lot on Sailor Moon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of like a much weirder take on magical girl stuff. So
Cool. I think mine is definitely Inuyasha. I think I established that in this episode already. And Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I think they did so much better than in the original series with
Yeah.
Brotherhood.
And a show with a really good dubbed version.
Yes. Yeah. And Naruto and Naruto Shippuden. I'll go back and watch that a lot.
Did you ever watch Boruto?
I've seen like the first few episodes of Boruto. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if I should keep watching it or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I've
I
seen
like
a
the
little
movie.
bit.
I like the animated movie to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I guess with that, we'll end this episode. Thank you for joining us, and please let us know in the comments what your favorite anime is, whether you just like it and like to go back to watch it, or if it's nostalgic for you. Please like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.